She didn't believe in legends or ghosts or places where time supposedly stood still. But the moment she read the subject line of the email, "The man who gazes at the mountain every day," something inside her shifted, as if that sentence had opened a door that didn't lead to an answer but to a question waiting to be asked. She traveled for hours, by train through valleys, by bus along ever narrower and winding roads, and then on foot for the last few kilometers, as no other means of transportation went there anymore. The village sat at an altitude where signals vanished and silence became more real than speech. It wasn't on any maps, at least not the digital ones. The wind greeted her, along with the scent of smoke and footsteps disappearing into the snow. The houses were old, huddled together as if keeping warm, curtains drawn, windows fogged. In the village, it seemed no one was in a hurry. Or perhaps time truly moved slower. No one asked who she was or what she wanted. They only looked at her with those brief, indifferent glances reserved for someone who surely wouldn't stay. In the village store, if it could even be called a store, she found a woman in an apron, her hands smelling of flour. "I'm looking for the man who gazes at the mountain," she said softly, more a question than a statement. The woman looked at her as if she already knew why she was there, as if everyone who came from the outside came for him. "He lives at the end of the village, the house with the green roof. You'll see a pair of binoculars in the window." Lena nodded, thanked her, and walked on. The path led uphill, and as she advanced, the houses grew sparser, the silence deeper. Then she saw it, a solitary house beneath the pines, with a yard where nothing grew but a single, thin, withered birch. In the window stood the binoculars. Old, brass-framed, shadowed by curtains that never moved. She paused for a moment. In her bag were a recorder, a notebook, a pencil, and unspoken questions. She knocked softly. The door opened only after the third knock. On the threshold stood an older man with thick brows and eyes that didn't look at her but somewhere beyond, far away. "Good afternoon," she said. He didn't respond. "I'm a writer. People talk about you. They say you gaze at the mountain every day at noon." He remained silent but didn't close the door. His face was like stone, shaped by time, calm but with cracks. "May I speak with you?" He was quiet for a long time. Then he simply turned and walked inside, leaving the door ajar. Lena felt her heart beat faster, not from fear, but from something akin to longing. She stepped in. Inside, it was warm, but not from the stove. More from the presence of the past, which had settled into the walls, the books, the black and white photographs. Everything smelled of paper, pine needles, and something unnamed. The old man sat in a chair by the window and adjusted the binoculars toward the mountain. It was a minute to noon. "I won't disturb you," she whispered, more to herself than to him. A distant church bell rang 12 times, and in that moment, without a word, the old man pressed his eyes to the binoculars. He gazed motionlessly, like someone not waiting to see but to feel again. Lena sat in silence, not daring to ask questions. That day she received no answers, but she knew she would stay. In the village, no one asks for names. Instead, they ask, "Will you stay long enough to hear the story to the end?" Lena decided to stay. The room she rented was small, with a view of the forest. The walls breathed dampness and pine resin, and the old wooden floor creaked with every step, as if reminding her of time already past. Yet, in that crackling silence, Lena felt something she couldn't explain, as if someone or something was thanking her for arriving. For days, she tried to find the words to approach the old man. She returned to his doorstep, stayed for hours, sitting on the steps without speaking. Sometimes he would nod, sometimes not, but he no longer closed the door the moment he saw her. Meanwhile, in the village, she began searching for traces. The first time she heard the story about her was from a young man who carved wooden picture frames. As he shaped the edge into a vine, he spoke softly, as if the story belonged neither to him nor to Lena, but to time itself. Long ago, many winters before the village lost its station, its trains, its lights, he was different. He had eyes that laughed and hands that built. He wasn't always old. Lena looked at him, and then, she asked, then she came or left, depending on who you ask. What was her name? The young man shrugged. No one remembers anymore. The second version came from an old teacher who sat by the window, knitting a scarf and peering through glasses that no longer helped. Her voice was a whisper, her hands full of memory. They say he waited. They say he still waits. But that's not true, child. He isn't a man who waits. He's a man who remembers. Remembers who? Lena asked. The girl who left, and I don't mean left to return, left into the wind, into the snow, some say into the war. And you, Lena whispered, as if speaking louder would shatter the memory. The old woman was silent. Then, I think she left into time. And he stayed to watch for her. The third story was the quietest. It came from the chapel above the village, where Lena met a priest without sermons, a man with a shadow instead of a cross around his neck. The binoculars aren't ordinary, he said. They don't show what is. They show what was. What do you mean? Some say he gazes at the mountain, some say he gazes at the past, and I think he gazes at nothing. He listens. The binoculars are an ear, not an eye. They hear what was lost, the whisper of her footsteps, the voice that last said, I'll return. Lena left the chapel with more questions than she'd entered with. Yet that night, for the first time, she dreamed. She dreamed of a hill under snow, binoculars floating alone in the air, and the silhouette of a woman walking backward, not toward the present, but deeper into the past. The next day, she returned to the old man. She said nothing, she simply sat. At noon, as every day, he raised the binoculars and gazed. That day, for the first time, his hand trembled, and when he finished, when he lowered the binoculars from his eyes, he turned to her and spoke. His voice was deep, like the sound of wind carrying leaves down a slope. Do you know what it means to look at something every day knowing you can't touch it? Lena didn't answer. She told me to look, to not forget, to stay here and wait for a sign. What sign? She asked. For the mountain to no longer be cold, for the sky to be silver, not blue. For the binoculars to show not just memory, but touch. Lena was silent. Then, softly she asked, Can I look through the binoculars? The old man closed his eyes, breathed slowly, then nodded. Her hands trembled as she took the brass binoculars. They felt warm, almost alive, as if breathing with her. She pressed them to her eyes, and the mountain vanished. She didn't see snow. She didn't see the forest. Instead, an old square, people dressed in clothes from some distant time. Music from a gramophone, a girl with a red scarf running towards someone, and that someone was him, the old man. But young, smiling, in a coat without buttons, with eyes that didn't yet know loss, the image flickered, like a film reaching its end. Lena lowered the binoculars. That's impossible. The old man looked at her with a faint smile. Not impossible, just forgotten. Who is she? She asked. Silence. What was her name? More silence. Then, barely audible, I'm not sure anymore. But you remember. I remember the way she looked at me, how she said my name when she laughed. I remember her standing on the hill and saying, Look at me, even when I'm not here, I remember everything, except her name. Lena felt tears, but they weren't hers. They were his, and she understood he didn't want to escape the pain with memory. He wanted to preserve the pain because in it was his only connection to what he'd lost. From that day on, Lena came every noon and gazed with him, not at the mountain. At time, sometimes she saw the square, sometimes the two of them at the train station, sometimes just a pair of laughing eyes behind a window. The binoculars never showed the same thing twice, but every time it was her. And the old man, every time he finished gazing, would whisper, She's still there. One day, as they sat in silence, Lena gathered her courage. How did you get the binoculars? The old man smiled for the first time. She gave them to me, in a box without a lid, on the day she left. She said, "Look through them and remember what we forgot to say." "What did you forget to say?" He looked at her for a long time, as if the years had suddenly collapsed into his eyes. "Goodbye." That night, Lena lay awake in her room. Outside, snow fell. Inside, her thoughts swirled about love, about time, about the things that remain when people are gone, and she made a decision. She had to find out who she was. She had to find the name, the story, everything the past had taken and the binoculars still held. Not for the article, not for the story, but for him, for the love that still hadn't spoken its last word. Dawn in the mountain village didn't come quickly. The sun lingered behind the peaks, as if afraid to disturb the silence of the still sleeping snow. Lena walked along the cobblestones as the world slowly woke, passing frozen windows quietly, as if carrying something fragile and precious in her thoughts. First, she went to the local library, hidden behind the old school. She entered to the creak of the door, greeted by the air of books no one sought anymore. The librarian was a woman with a voice like paper. She didn't ask why Lena was searching for information about the old man. She just nodded and pointed toward the old registers, newspapers, forgotten almanacs that served as chronicles of a world that no longer existed. Lena spent hours among the dusty pages. Names flickered and faded, like stars you could only follow for so long before they vanished. She read about festivals, about long-ago winters, about tragic disappearances. In an article from an old local paper, a faded headline, "Young man left alone after beloved vanishes, last seen on the path to the valley, year of disappearance, 1968. Below, a black and white photo of a couple at the train station. A smiling man, a girl with a red scarf. Though the image was grainy, Lena knew it was her. Below the photo, Anna S., born near G Mountain, disappearance reported, traces stopped at the lake that freezes in winter. Anna, she had a name. Lena stared at the photo for a long time. In that moment, she thought she heard a faint laugh, distant and elusive, like a bell in the fog. She returned to the old man's house earlier than usual that evening. She carried the photo, carefully copied from the paper, and a heart beating faster than her mind could understand. The old man sat as always, the binoculars in his lap, but he wasn't gazing at the mountain. He was staring blankly into the fire. "Her name was Anna," she said softly. His eyes flickered, but his face didn't react. "Born near G Mountain. Disappeared in 1968. Some say she tried to reach the valley. They never found her, but I found this." She handed him the photo. His hands hovered gently over the paper, as if afraid it might break. He was silent for a long time. Then, "That was the last time I saw her, that day. She said she had to go. She didn't say where." Lena sat across from him. "Why did she leave?" The old man stared at the photo. "She believed an end was waiting for us here." At that time, she believed the world wasn't big enough for what she felt. She wanted to find the truth about herself, about the past, about voices that came to her in dreams. She left to find answers, and she never returned. No, she only left me the binoculars. She said, "If you see through them what you can't touch, know that I'm still here." That night, Lena didn't go to her room. She left her things in her bag and headed for the lake mentioned in the papers. The local path was overgrown, but she followed the traces of an old trail where lovers once fled the world. The snow crunched under her footsteps and the moon lit her way. At one point she stopped, her heart raced. In the middle of the frozen lake in the distance, like a shadow, the silhouette of a woman in a red scarf. Lena rubbed her eyes. There was no one. But the feeling, the scent of perfume, the trace of footsteps in the snow, the distant sound of laughter remained. She returned at dawn, exhausted, confused, and with one certainty: the binoculars didn't lie. In the following days, she devoted herself to the village archive, hidden behind the butcher's office. The villagers began opening their doors to her more, Perhaps because they saw her bringing the old man bread and silence every morning. Perhaps because they, too, wanted someone to uncover what they'd kept quiet for too long. In the archive, she found a handwritten note, unsigned, that followed her. If someone ever comes asking about her, tell them she loved the stars but feared the dark, that she said dreams aren't what put us to sleep but what wake us, and tell him I tried to stop her, but her gaze was already on the other side of the world. Lena sat and shivered. There was something in those words bigger than nostalgia. As if they were the last thing anyone had ever said about Anna. Below the note was a bound list of students from 1957, among them Anna S. and a name Lena already knew, the old man's real name from his youth. After days spent among papers and shadows, Lena returned to him. He sat across from her and she whispered, "Your name was Julian." The old man looked up, his eyes showed no surprise, only quiet acknowledgement. Yes, a long time ago, and her Anna, she wasn't just a girl you loved, she was more. He only nodded. "Do you know where she is now?" Lena asked, though she knew the question had no answer. "I know where she isn't," he replied softly. "She isn't here." Silence settled between them like snow on an old roof. That night, Lena looked through the binoculars alone for the first time, and she saw herself on the lake surrounded by snow, walking toward the silhouette in the red scarf, reaching out. The sky shimmering, then darkness and a voice. Some stories don't end, they find you when you stop running from them. When she returned the binoculars to Julian, she told him, "I think you loved her more than you knew how to say." He only replied, "That's why I gazed, words are too light." A gaze, it stays. And Lena understood. Perhaps the story would never have an ending. Perhaps her task wasn't to finish it, but to make it last forever. Lena couldn't stop thinking about what she'd seen through the binoculars. Every moment spent with Julian grew clearer, like an image emerging from the fog. She felt as if all the time she'd spent in that village had merged into one vast picture she needed to clarify. She imagined everything Julian had seen through the binoculars, how it was more than nostalgia. It was a search for something unfinished. Weeks passed, and Lena continued her research. Traces were everywhere, but none led to an answer that could close the story. Every part of the village, every stone, every tree carried tales of past times, of love that never had a chance, of memories that couldn't be forgotten. Lena reached the final piece of history, the oldest traces in the records tied to Julian's past. She read about his youth, about his love for Anna, which was so fierce it felt like a battle with time, with something unseen. She read about mountains that seemed unreachable, about a path that led nowhere, about a journey with no destination. She loved, but she knew it wasn't enough. That love, no matter how strong, couldn't stop time. Then she found something that changed her view of the entire story. Julian wasn't just gazing at the past, he was gazing at himself. His gazing wasn't just about what had been, but about what hadn't, what he could have become, what he could have done. Lena realized Julian didn't want to return to the past to fix it. He wanted to return to face what he couldn't change, to let go. The last time he'd been with Anna, she'd told him to say goodbye, but he couldn't, because he couldn't say goodbye to the love or to himself. When she vanished, he couldn't let her go, so he gazed through the binoculars, watching her fade but never forgetting. In his eyes, she was always there. With each new day, she was there, even if she wasn't real. On the last day of her stay, Lena went to the lake again. This time, she brought the binoculars. She didn't know what she was looking for, but she felt it was the only way to clarify everything, to look one more time. Perhaps to look into a past that wasn't hers but held all the answers she sought. She stood at the edge of the lake, the binoculars in her hands. Her eyes were fixed on the horizon. And then she saw, as if the world had melted, she stepped closer. In the middle of the lake, where the golden glow of the moon reflected on the water, stood Anna in her red scarf, facing Julian. She looked like a shadow, but Lena knew it was her. a shadow of the past that hadn't vanished, that had always been present. Julian gazed through the binoculars and couldn't hold her because she didn't belong to that world. And as Lena looked at her, she knew Anna didn't belong to her world either. But there she was, like Julian. When she looked again, Lena realized everything was in her hands. She wasn't just searching for a story, she was searching for something more. She was searching to clarify her own attachment to the past, to understand what it meant to sometimes hold on to love. And as Anna faded from view, Lena stopped feeling sorrow. She realized sorrow didn't have to be held on to. That love didn't have to end, that it could be let go. When she returned to Julian, she held only one thing in her hand, the red scarf she'd taken from the path. She handed it to him, a sign that she was now the one who had helped bring everything to a close. "She's gone," she said, "but you waited for her, and now, even though she's gone, you won't wait anymore." Julian looked at the scarf, his hands took it, but he said nothing. He looked toward the mountains, then at her. His face held a peace Lena couldn't interpret, but now she knew. That love wasn't about holding on. Love was about letting go, about letting what had been forever be a part of you, but not trapped within you. Lena left, but she knew this moment would stay with her forever, that the story was over and that love wasn't about finding it, but about letting it go.